Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another exciting edition of Solar Now and the Future with its economic impact on Black America. And I'm your host, Ronald Bethay, and you know if you join us on a regular basis, the slogan for this show, if there's power in numbers, then the Positive Change Purchasing Cooperative LLC captured that power for your financial benefit. The Positive Change Purchasing Cooperative serves as an economic blueprint for renewable energy companies both large and small, along with increasing market share for African and African American owned renewable energy companies to address the high energy costs at our historically black colleges and universities, to utilize black owned farmlands and HBCU campuses to develop capacity and initiatives for renewable energy projects to bring down the underemployment of young African and African American men and women locally, nationally, and throughout the diaspora. Also, to educate the African and African American community about the economic impacts of climate change and the need for environmental education through Black Talk radio programs such as Solar Now and the Future with its economic impact on Black America. Ladies and gentlemen, the show is also brought to you every week by the Black Sports Legends Foundation, BSLF HBCU Solar Radio Talk Show Initiative. And if you're watching me today, I'm wearing one of our um, t-shirts representing our one of our sponsoring 501c3 organizations, the Black Sports Legends Foundation, which I found back in 2010. And I've used the Black Sports Legends Foundation as an anchor to be for a launching pad for numerous projects. But being that we're in the fall year and I'm in Morgan Bear, who played for the legendary Earl Banks at Morgan State back in the early 70s, and we won the first MEAC championship football team. So this is why I wanted to bring this to your attention today. If you're following me here on my platform, the Positive Change Purchasing LLC, online radio, TV, podcast, radio network. Ladies and gentlemen, we don't have a scheduled guest today, but we have some very, very important information that we want to share with our community as relates to a issue which we know has been in as it relates around the issue of artificial intelligence, AI, crypto mining, and blockchain technology. Now, the reason why there has been such a large emphasis around data centers, because data centers aren't new. The Northern Virginia corridor, I-66, has served as the national hub or almost the Silicon Valley of the East Coast for data centers for the last 30 years. Northern Virginia has approximately 250 data centers located in Northern Virginia, and 50% or 75% of all of the phone cell phone calls are worldwide are routed through Northern Virginia. Now, that is data that you can Google it, you can research it for your own information. But why is this such an impact as relates to energy? Well, we need to look at what is causing your energy bills to go up and why are your energy bills so high. So our leads off subject today was talking about the crisis that we see in front of us as it relates to the energy cost when we begin to look at our utility bills, and the regulatory entities that regulate those industries are are broke up into 11 different entities around the United States. But specifically today, we're going to talk about the Mid Atlantic states, which is composed of 13 states and the District of Columbia, which is regulated by the PJM. Now, as we're speaking to, I'm speaking to you today, there has been some serious turmoil going on as relates to what is happening with the PJM because you have 13 governors and representatives from the DC government in Philadelphia today speaking to this issue. Now, the driving force behind this is the demand for energy. Now, this particular topic that I'm discussing with you today is entitled No More Excuses. Governors call on PJM to fix the grid and lower prices. This was an online press release which I received today from Mrs. Emily Lee Halverson, who is a member and the director of communications for the Evergreen Action Group. This press release went on today to say, today governors met in Philadelphia to discuss rising electricity prices and the huge PJM interconnection. PJM to give states a stronger role in planning the future of the country's largest power grid response. Now, Evergreen Actions State Policy Director Julia Corti released the following statement. Today, the summit makes one thing clear. The spotlight is squarely on the PJM for rising utility bills. For too long, the PJM has put members' profits ahead of family bills and left clean energy stuck in the queue. We applaud Governor Shapiro and the bipartisan coalition of governors for demanding real action on the queue and governance and make it clear that they are willing to leave the PJM if it doesn't deliver, giving states a meaningful voice just as other regions already do. It is essential to build a more affordable, reliable, and functional grid. The questions how is whether the PJM willing finally to listen and take responsibility for fixing the crisis it helped create. Now, if you've been following me on this show, you know I've been beating the drum around this issue with the PJM for quite some time. And the backup article to this is governors push for more sway over the biggest U.S. grid as the power bills surge. State leaders hold PJM governors collaborate for great influence over the PJM grid. The caption of our show today, capacity payments rise 1,000% due to data centers and the strategic power supply. Governors form a role in inspired by Midwest England models. Now, this is in Reuters dated today, September 22nd, 2025. Governors of more than a quarter of the states on Monday and the greater influence of the PJM internet and country's biggest power grid, where the electricity prices are surging as AI data centers demand outpaces the connections for new supplies. Now, we need to unpack some of the information. And in unpacking this some information, if you've been following me on the show, you know I've been talking about the fact that the PJM is comprised of 13 states. Within those 13 states, you have, in fact, 65 million customers who are dependent for what's called a kilowatt day. And in 2024, 2023, at the end of the December of 2023, Gus Shapiro did in fact file a law by the collaboration of governors of the District of Columbia. At that, Phillips, who was the former head of the Federal Record American to serve in that capacity, who was tasked when the suit was filed in D.C. Phillips was able to get this case. The governors, the states, the governors, and the District of Columbia, which stopped a 800% natural gas rate hike, which would have cost those 65 billion dollars, which would have went in effect June. Wholesale rates are always looking at the next two prior years. Now, before the wholesale auction took place in 2024, Mr. Phillips and the members of the Federal Regulatory Commission had to entertain another request for a rate hike. That rate hike was a 686% rate hike, which the utilities filed with their attorneys, and that rate hike did pass. In 2023, we as consumers living in the territory of the PJM, we were paying $34.17 for what they call a megawatt day. When the rate hike was passed, it was a 686% rate hike. It jumped from $34.17 for a megawatt day to $269.92 for a megawatt day, the biggest rate hike in the history of the PJM, which was supposed to be capped in the original settlement at $325, with stating that it could never go over that cap. Well, ladies and gentlemen, as of July 22nd of 2025, there was another 22% rate increase over and above that, which took us over the cap to $325 for a megawatt day. This is why the emergency meeting was called in Philadelphia, and the governors are meeting there today. This is a very urgent situation because we're looking at that we've had over 300,000 African American women laid off of jobs, specifically those who are working in the federal government economy that displayed. But like I said, as to what is going on as relates to the PJM. Now, there have been a number of various legal actions that have taken place as it relates to the PJM. And we're going to share some of that information with you here on this platform today as it relates to going back and looking at some of those issues that have taken place and litigations and issues that have taken place as relates to the PJM. So if many of you who are listening, if you have access to your computer, you can go to our website at positivechangepc.com. That's positivechangepc.com. You want to click on the news and events tab. You want to go over to your right and you want to go to our May 25 archives link. And if you do that, you can stroll down and you'll be able to find this article, which is talking about New York Bitcoin miners are buying up power plants coming and communities are fighting back. This is another article that speaks to the high demand and what is going on as relates to the data centers being built around this country and those that have been decommissioned plants that have been purchased. Now, this particular article was uh, dated 5/12/25 in Climate News, inside Climate News. Lauren Bain wrote this particular article. New York is home of four of the largest Bitcoin mines in the country, which consumes quantities of electricity, power, and water to cool their servers, farms. Imminent clouds, humming noise around the clock, and a flood of atmospheric conspicuous greenhouse gases and pollutants, which creates what we call greenhouse gas initiatives. In many cases, they are also driving nearby residents crazy. I'm probably within a mile and a half from the facility, and I can hear it, said Erwin Robinson, a sociology professor at Cornelius University in Buffalo, who lives close to the Bitcoin mine near New York border in Canada. It is a low noise that sort of sits in your ears. Bitcoin is the largest, best known cryptocurrency. It is managed by decentralized network of Bitcoin users, a network of algorithms assign each transaction a unique random identifying code, which Bitcoin mines deliver by operating powerful computers day and night, running an endless series of random numbers to break the codes. Once a correct code is reached, confirming that the transaction, which happens on an average across a network of every 10 minutes, a Bitcoin miner achieves 3.1 new minute Bitcoins, worth around over 950, well, $95,000, almost $100,000, the value of each Bitcoin. Now, I know that the value has gone up since this article has been written, which is the fee for helping maintain the network and keeping it secure. The energy used for these operations is very high, which means the price of electricity that governs where these mines are located. Some Bitcoin miners are attracted to New York because of its cheap electricity in the northern towns. I just wanted to touch on this particular article, and we're going to talk on a group of these articles to give you an idea to let people know that this is a national problem. As a matter of fact, there was a recent summit that was held in Dubai in Saudi Arabia, and Brookings was one of the sponsors for this, and you had representatives from all over the country, and not country but the world, who are building these data centers. And their projected goal is to build 8,000 data centers worldwide. Well, you know that the U.S. is always wants to do what leads the way. One of the gentlemen in the show said, "We've got everything we need except the power." Well, ladies and gentlemen, you're going to find out that we are the backbones to the power, and how this is playing out. Republicans charging ahead with bill hiking energy costs so Elon Musk can add more obscene wealth. This is an article you'll be able to find also in our May news release. Okay? Also, you can scroll down and you'll find the article that I wanted to address as part of our show today. Consumer watchdog accuses regional grid operator of overcharging Marylanders for power. Inside climate news. PJM energy markets and grid rules face legal challenges from state consumers advocates, which say that the grid operators unfairly charge local consumers for out of state power needs and a bloated capacity. Now, you want to get into this article because it sort of gives you some other background, and I'm going to specifically speak to why your energy bills are so high and what you can do about that. This particular article was authored by Aman Azar, published on May 1st of 2025, Inside Climate News. And this was a very, very informative article. The Maryland Office of the People's Counsel and the State Consumer Watchdog has filed two major complaints against regional power grid operators, arguing that the market and infrastructure planning rules are systematically overcharging Maryland electricity customers to subsidize services and infrastructure benefiting other states, particularly the state of Virginia. In one of the complaints to the Federal Regulatory Commission, jointly filed with the state of Illinois and New Jersey agencies, Maryland's Office of People's Counsel targets the PJM's interconnection for 25-26 capacity auctions of July of 2024, which prices surged to $269.69 for a megawatt day, increasing a staggering increase from $28.92, which I stand correct to correct that information for a megawatt day previously in previous auctions. According to the complaint, overall auction costs increased from $2.2 billion to $14.7 billion in a single year. Now, I want to be very clear about this, ladies and gentlemen. We just got hit with this rate hike here in the state of Maryland, producing an unjust spike in expenses for consumers. The grid serves 13 states in the District of Columbia. This result reflects the PJM's consistent favoring of interesting and large corporations and utilities and generators of consumer interests over consumers' interests. Maryland's People's Counsel David S. Lapp said in an email response inside Climate News, "We are asking the Federal Regulatory Commission to undo this unjust result and direct PJM to reset the prices for the 2024 auction by correcting the same flawed rules that the FERC used already accepted to need to fix for future auctions," he added. Well, we're in 2025. We know that did not take place. This correction was never corrected. If successful, the complaint could reduce the projected consumers' cost by $5 billion, and the Office of People Counsel said. In an email, the PJM spokesman Jeffrey Shields said, PJM has not acknowledged flaws in its auction rules, adding that the rules for the 25-26 auction were at the same time of the auction of continue to be just and reasonable as approved by the Federal Regulatory Commission. He argued that legally the results cannot be retroactive and changed. Well, anything can be retroactive and changed. This is someone speaking for the fossil fuel industry. Inside Climate News previously reported that the separate legal filing by advocacy group the Sierra Club, which estimated that the Baltimore Gas Electric BG&E customers could see their monthly bills rise by 19% due to an unprecedented surge in capacity auction prices. The OPM complaint argues that the spike was due to actual supply shortages. Well, this article goes on and it closes out by saying, requiring Maryland residents, customers to bear the massive cost of contrary to the bedrock rate-making principles that allocate costs based on the cause and costs and who benefits and who unlawfully is unlawful, the General Counsel Lapp said. Under the Federal Powers Act, capacity auction customers cannot be required to pay twice for the same service, Lapp said. PJM's own independent market monitor also said that in the 25-26 capacity, auctions don't reflect the real market conditions, saying it was significantly affected by flawed market designs and decisions. OPC complaint, the Office of People's Counsel in Maryland, citing the monitor's findings, estimated that the flaws, including exclusive power plants and other capacity barriers, contributed $7.6 billion in excess charges. Prices to BG&E reached $466 for a megawatt day, according to the complaint. Now you can see just how far out of line we are with these overcharges, and people are hurting, ladies and gentlemen. That's why I wanted to go back and refer back to some of these back articles. Now, when we begin to drill down into this thing, the Office of People's Counsel argues that it was unfair for Marylanders to pay for projects that won't financially benefit from, especially those costs from growth in other states. The agency warned that Maryland customers could be stuck footing a bill of expensive upgrades that would not even be needed if the data centers demand in Virginia wasn't so high. Both complaints argued that the PJM reflects border structural partners. Maryland ratepayers are being unfairly burdened throughout inflated auction prices or through disproportionate infrastructure costs. And we're talking about additional $8 billion that this article goes on to talk about, ladies and gentlemen. This is why your energy bill is so high. Now, we're going to go back and we're going to look at what's taking place as it relates to the data centers and how and why your energy bills are so high and what can be done about that. Now, the Maryland Clean Energy Centers here in Maryland, I will be speaking with the executive director on October the 1st. She will be online on this platform, Solar Now in the Future with its economic impact on Black America, with one of the gentlemen that is Mr. Damian Trasada, who works there with the Maryland Clean Energy Center, which serves as a green bank of Maryland. And we'll be asking some interesting questions around some of the same issues that I am discussing and sharing with you today. Now, when we begin to look at right here in Prince George's County, where I'm physically located, and as people say, closer to home, for those who are listening to us, Prince George's County is right outside of our nation's capital. It's bordered the east of the District of Columbia is bordered by Prince George's County. We're referred to as Ward 9 for those who live in the DMV area. It's an inside joke. Well, that's probably not funny because so many of our African American residents who were born and raised in the District of Columbia have been forced out of the district into Prince George's County because of the cost of housing. Now, Prince George's County residents speak out against proposed Landover data center. Now, if any of you live here in the area, many of you remember the old Capitol Center here in Washington, D.C., where at that time they were known as the Washington Bullets. They played the NBA franchise, played NBA ball there. Well, that facility was torn down, and what's going on now, there is a proposal floating around to, in fact, build a data center there. This was a meeting that took place September the 10th, 2025, this month. Local questions about transparency, warned of environmental and health risks in a rally before the task force meeting. This took place right here in our backyard. Tanya Beckman addresses the crowd of community members and media personnel during the rally and press conference, condemning a proposed data center in Landover, Maryland, using in her speech to speak against the prioritization of capitalism interests over human health. Proposed construction of the data center at the former Landover Mall site has left many Prince George's County residents and organizations outraged due to the potential health and environmental implications of the project could bring. The $5 billion data campus, dubbed Bright Seat Tech Park and proposed by Lerner Enterprises, would comprise 5 facilities spanning 4.1 miles and square feet. 87 acre site would utilize up to 820 megawatts of power per day. Because of this size, and numerous facilities within the project could be considered a hyperscale data center. Now, if you know anything about data centers, you know when you're talking about a data center of this size, you're talking about the consumption of a great deal of energy. So, in order for me to be correct on this issue, we always like to use the search engines. Here we go again. utilizing what? The AI to get information. As I raise this question, okay, Google, how much energy will 820 megawatts of power per day, how many homes will that power?
820 megawatts of power per day equates to 19,680 megawatt hours, MWH of energy, 820 megawatts by 24 hours. This amount of energy could power approximately 656,000 average American homes, with an average daily consumption of 30 kilowatt hours per household.
Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you heard that. That much power could power approximately 656,000 homes a day with using a consumption of 30 kilowatt hours per day. So we're talking about something that's very, 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 very substantial in terms of cost. The issue is where they and how they're going to power this data center. Well, we also, in doing our research before we came on the air, was finding out they're talking about building a gas turbine plant to or two turbine plants to power this data center. Well, if that's the case, how are you going to get the power from point A to point B? That is why I wanted to give you some realistic issues about what's taking place nationally, what's taking place locally in our black backyards, because this is not a happenstance process of one thing happening in a vacuum. It is happening nationally across the U.S. And if you go to our news and events tab, you'll find out the same thing that is going on in rural America. Matter of fact, this morning, I'm trying to think of the national show that came on, but the young lady was working with interviewing a country western uh, celebrity, which in fact was doing the same thing, complaining about how the Tennessee TDA, Tennessee Water Authority, which has such power over so many states, can come in and claim eminent domain and basically take people's property to build this transmission infrastructure of these high powered grid power lines, which should be going in the ground. But they're not putting them in the ground. They want to build the transmission, traditional transmission lines for transmitting this power from these data centers rather than putting that transmission power into the earth in type of the proper tubing, which will protect the environment if there's some kind of storms, so that those lines can't be destroyed by uh, fires, electricity can't hit those power lines. No, they're not talking about doing that. They're talking about using the same traditional formats of building grid infrastructure rather than running the pipelining these transmission lines from the gas turbine plants to these data centers. And that is where we are, ladies and gentlemen. Now, let's look at another interesting article that talks about this issue of why your electricity bills are so high and what can be done about that. This particular article is dated April 25, 2025, by authored by Charles Harper and Melanie Kamar, who published this in Evergreen Action. And I thought this was a very, very interesting article because it not only gave you why is your electric bill going up, why the attack on the solar and wind industry. Now, in looking at this particular article, it's not your imagination. Energy bills in the US have been rising, and if you're feeling overwhelmed by it, you're not alone. A recent survey found that over 50% of Americans reported feeling overwhelmed by utility costs. And there's a link that will take you to an article. Average cost of utility bills, 54% of Americans feel overwhelmed. And it went on to say, home living isn't rent or mortgage payments and other costs are living is paying utility bills. From weather and heating to electric to cable, utilities can add up, particularly electricity, which often powers not just appliances and electronics, but also HVAC systems and your air conditioners. So, this was a very interesting article about that, and it gave you some methodology to learn how Americans are faring when it comes to tracking utility bills. They surveyed 1,600 renters and homeowners across the U.S. in 1924. We asked the current utility bills as well as how Americans are handling payment aged just from 18 to 75, and the average age of 39 to 49 were men. 49 were women, and 2% were binary in not disclosing all concessions in their articles drawn by the answer in the survey. 1 in 3 Americans are struggling to pay their utility bills. Well, we understand that. That's why I wanted people to understand that this is something that's affecting everybody. My question is, do people realize that the PJM, they have 1,000 voting members? 99.9% of them are stakeholders in the fossil fuel industry. And they vote on the cost of energy, what kind of energy can be used, and whether that energy can be uplinked to the grid. For wind and solar in the PJM region, for solar, it's only 1% cleared capacity. For wind, it's only 3%. But they've got over 3,000 projects that's been built that are setting in what they call the queue that can't get permitted and uplinked to the grid to help bring down the cost of energy for everybody in this 13 state region and these 65 million customers. I think that is criminal. But let's look at the politics. Your current president, called a meeting when he was running for office and said to the tech and fossil fuel industry, y'all put up $1 billion and you can do whatever you want to do. But we know he often makes statements But the fact of the matter, this was reported by Politico. So I'm repeating what was said in Politico. In fact, because of the amount of money that can be contributed to campaigns, of course, he didn't raise no $1 billion at that meeting, but we don't know how much money he was able to raise from the fossil fuel industry and the tech industry. I do know this: the day of his inauguration, I looked at who was sitting behind him. Zuckerberg, Musk, all these tech giants were sitting behind Trump at his inauguration. Now, who benefits? Let's look at, why is your bill going up? Just to tell you something about the geopolitical politics in the game. You might be wondering why your cost is so high. The answer is largely boils down to fossil fuel prices are volatile. Surging electricity demand and impacts on climate crisis, and those higher energy costs, higher electric bills, higher natural gas, fossil fuel bills, and higher gasoline prices. You'll find this under our news and events tab, ladies and gentlemen, at positivechangepc.com. What causes these higher power bills? Power bills include the costs produce electricity at the power plant and the cost of the grid infrastructure needed to get it to your home or business. Both have gone up. Right now, about 60% of U.S. electricity comes from fossil fuels, including fossil fuel gas and coal. Fossil fuels have increased over the last few years. Prices have increased over the past few years. Now, it ain't just the past few years, it's still going up, particularly in response to the war in Ukraine and other geopolitical uncertainty, and they remain quite volatile. When the cost of fossil fuels needed to produce this electricity goes up, it's passed on to you and on your higher electricity bill. But I've been hearing the GOP go back to the Republicans go back to their districts and say it's wind and solar. Well, I think somebody's lying. Based on this information and this data, the upkeep cost of the grid infrastructure has gone also increased. The hidden reasons for this increase is climate change, which is, of course, primarily caused by the burning of fossil fuels, which more extreme weather events and wildfires. Utility companies are paying more to repair and upgrade power lines. Some power lines have also sparked wildfires, including in California, so utilities are paying more for risk insurance to protect themselves from future fires. Utilities, again, many of these costs are passed through the customers through their electricity bills. Demand for electricity is surging in the US, and is this starting to show up on your electricity bill as power hungry data centers get built around the country to enable a boom in artificial intelligence, crypto mining, and blockchain technology needed to build new power infrastructures to supply these data centers. Without ratepayers' protection, communities get stuck footing the bill for big tech power needs. I didn't make any of this up, ladies and gentlemen. I'm reading exactly why your electricity bill is so damn high. What about higher gas bills and gasoline prices? Global instability and controversial new tariffs are driving up gas and gasoline prices, impacting consumers. And the broader broader economy. Fossil fuels like natural gas and gasoline are both bought and sold on the global market, so geopolitical uncertainty can affect their costs. We saw this when Russia invaded Ukraine when the global fuel prices spiked. In recent tariffs announced by the guy at 1600 Pennsylvania has also increased the cost of fossil fuel and gasoline, much of which is important for countries like Canada and Mexico. Tariffs on Canada's energy are expected to increase gasoline prices in the Midwest to go up by 50 cents per gallon, while Americans who use electricity heat pumps are heating electric vehicles for transportation are less exposed to volatile fuel prices. Higher fuel prices also lead to higher prices of goods and services for required energy to make or transport it. Now, if that's the case, why is the present administration at EPA, why did Trump sign executive order rescinding the investment tax credit for new vehicles was due to sunset December 31st, 2032. It's been moved back to September the 30th, 2025. Today is the 22nd. So we got 8 days before the $7,500 tax credit if you buy a new electric vehicle disappears. If you buy a used one, it's 4,000. In 8 days, it disappears. Why? When the U.S. automobile industry, based on information that you can Google, they will tell you that they don't have the exact numbers, but they project out that the U.S. electric vehicle automobile charge dealers will lose $168 billion if you project that out from September the 30th, 2025 to December 31st of 2032. That's over. Do the math. That's 7 years in the future. And the auto industry gonna lose $168 billion because somebody want to undo what Biden did through the Inflation Reduction Act. He also rescinded this manufacturing tax credit for renewable energy projects. Now, I don't have time to get into all of this. We delve down on this portion of why your utility bills are so damn high so people can understand this. Now, what can you do to lower your energy bills? Goes right back to the same thing. Not all energy bills are made equal. What you end up paying each month is on your electricity bill largely depends on the decisions your state makes on where and how it gets its energy, whether it has invested in renewable energy efficiency buildings or how dramatically climate change has affected your part of the country. In other words, local policy matters when understanding your energy costs. What do the states with the lowest prices have in common? According to 2024 report by the nonpartisan think tank Energy Innovation, many of the practices that have been seen in lower energy increases since 2010 are states that have built large amounts of energy, clean energy. States like Iowa, Kansas, New Mexico, Oklahoma have built the most cheap wind and solar, have actually seen energy prices increase less than the overall inflation. Which states have the highest energy bills? It turns out to be states most reliant on gas and electricity have been exposed to most of the higher fuel costs, volatile fuel costs. States that have lost aging coal plants have also shrunk large amounts of money into keeping expensive plants online. Other Common denominators in high energy costs is extreme weather, sites like California where wildfires put grid infrastructure at risk and create financial liabilities have seen bills go up more than average. States that have more energy efficiency buildings and efficiency requirements usually see lower energy bills, even higher prices. If you're using less energy, then you use less, is less affects your energy price hikes. So it's talking about energy efficiency. We're going to be talking to folks from the Maryland Clean Energy Center. How do I lower my bills? There are several lessons to learn from the states that have less kept prices low. The first lesson is to build cheap, clean energy helps build bills come down. Energy is cheaper than fossil fuel. Wind and solar are the lowest two cheapest form of electricity. The states that utilize and build can also take advantage of federal tax credits of 30%. Even without federal tax credits, wind and solar projects are about half the price of a natural gas power. Wind turbines and solars can also be built faster than fossil fuel plants. Effect electricity demand increase every year, especially for the growth of AI data centers. If your energy doesn't keep up with the energy demand, you need to see higher prices. You will see higher prices. We are already seeing these increases, like places like the Mid Atlantic, and have not built much clean energy. The 13 Mid Atlantic states that are about to see a 30% increase in power prices. Wind and solar projects, usually smaller and are made in modular parts like panels, blades, can be used to manufacture. Meanwhile, gasoline requires much larger construction efforts and subject to storage supply chains back up until 2030s. You can also reduce your individual energy by installing rooftop solar panels, meaning you need to buy much less from your utility company. Through potential expensive front roof solar and accompanying batteries can also take advantage of 30% federal tax credit. Well, that's getting ready to go away, ladies and gentlemen. Well, look, I've come to the end of this show, Solar Now and the Future, with its economic impact on Black America. I hope that I brought you news that you could definitely use. I've been on the airways for now 60 minutes. We did not even take a break. We did not tell people how you can support this program. You can support this program by going to our website at positivechangepc.com. Remember that this show is brought to you every week by the Positive Change Purchasing Corporation LLC, which serves as an economic blueprint for renewable energy companies, both large and small, and to increase market share for African and African American renewable energy companies to address the high energy costs at our historically black colleges and universities, to utilize black owned farmlands and HBCU campuses to develop capacity and initiatives for renewable energy projects to bring down the underemployment of young African and African American men and women locally, nationally, and throughout the diaspora. Also to educate the African and African American community about the economic impacts of climate change and the need for environmental education through Black Talk Radio programs such as Solar Now and the Future, with its economic impact on Black America. And ladies and gentlemen, you can go to our website at positivechangepc.com, go over to our donate button and click on the button. And if you would support this program, it would greatly be appreciated, because we're definitely not the greedy, but just the needy here on this platform, trying to bring this information to you every week. We were determined to try to get a show in today. We'll probably be doing another show later on this week. We know we have one scheduled for next week, but we want to bring on a litany of guests that we're reaching out to. So I'm going to continue to keep moving forward with this platform and to keep this information alive for the community, because we are in some very, very dire times right now. And it's information that people can need. And it's The motto of the great Dr. Kathy Hughes, she says, information is power. It is if you take that information and you get a plan of action and you execute the plan. Because having information and not doing anything with it is no use to have it. It's like my grandmother, Miss Emma McLeod, used to tell me. She says, "Son, if common sense was common, then everybody'd have some." With that being said, ladies and gentlemen, to next week, we want to greet you and say go in peace as we close another exciting edition of Solar Now and the Future with its economic impact on Black America. Until next week, we say go in peace.